I am currently in front of a highway during rush hour, and as I look at the cars going by, I can't help but notice how diverse all of them are. Just in the last few seconds of looking, I've counted at least 7 different makes of a car. And yet when I look into the palms of people's hands and what phone they're using, literally all of them are iPhones, with the occasional Samsung to spice things up. So why is this? Why are phones not as diverse as cars? Okay, so maybe you're still not fully convinced about the comparison between phones and cars, and I'm gonna get into a couple more points as to why I think those two things should be compared to each other. But first, let's look at the statistics to make sure what we're seeing is actually what's happening throughout the entire US when it comes to the diversity of both phones and cars. So, according to Counterpoint Research, in Q4 of 2024, 65% of US shipments of phones were iPhones. That is followed by a distant second place of Samsung with 18%, Lenovo, who makes Motorola phones, with 10%, and the rest altogether having 7% of the market share in Q4 of 2024. Not very diverse. Now looking over at the car side of things, according to Cox Automotive, GM was the top automaker in all of 2024 with 16.8% market share, followed closely by Toyota with 14.6%, then Ford with 12.9%, then Hyundai with 10.5%, and then a bunch of others that I don't feel like listing out right now, but here they are. So what gives? I mean, these are two things that people usually have personal to them, are used usually on a daily basis, and are used for short and long periods of time, from 1-minute car rides and text to 1-hour road trips and video essays. It gets even more odd to me when you realize that you can separate the customers buying phones into different groups just like you can with cars. Someone with a lot of money to buy a car might buy a luxurious car, while another person with a similar amount of money might buy a sports car. These are two really different people. One person wants a smooth and comfortable ride, while the other person wants to feel the power of the machine. And because both of these two different customers exist, the diversity of cars can also grow. Then you look at phones in a similar eye and realize that you can also group them up. Just like how some people utilize their phones for taking very high quality pictures, while others might use it just for gaming, and a majority of others would probably just use it for scrolling social media and small web apps. But in all these cases, these customer groups all buy an iPhone in the end, the luxury car of phones. So why is that? Now we could just blame this on all other brands using Android, and Android equals bad and therefore iPhone good and only choice. But that's not a very good argument, especially when you look at the other parts of the world and how their market of phones have grown. Oh, did I forget to mention the global market? Okay, this part's going to be really short, but it's so different from the US that I kind of wanted to give it its own space here, and you'll see why in a second. So let's look at a couple more statistics here, and then we're done. Okay, we're done. We're done after that. All right. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly add, because I totally forgot about it, that all of these statistics come from StatCounter GlobalStats. And basically how they get their data is by looking at over 1 million different websites that have at least over 5 billion page views per month. And then they basically trace back where that traffic is coming from, meaning what device everybody is using. However, sometimes they can't identify the device that is being used, which is why they have an unknown category. And that unknown category can sometimes get a little high, and I'll explain that through the video in the parts where it does pop up, but for the most part, I think that this data is still very interesting to look at, and it does definitely give us insight into what phones are being used throughout the entire world. So this is the market share distribution in 2024 inside of Europe. Still not very diverse, but there is a little more sharing when it comes to Samsung and Google. Then, interestingly, with Germany, Samsung devices were higher, but still very similar. Xiaomi also tries to compete with the others, but just not quite. Okay, now let's look at the Asian market, and whoa! Okay, all right, a little different here. All right, now let's look at everything globally and worldwide, and yeah, that's still looking better. Not as good as the Asian market, but still really good. That Asian market especially, though, very much looks like the diversity of the US automotive industry. Very interesting. Okay, so now we can definitively say that it is the absolute worst in the US when it comes to variety of phones versus cars. So now let's look at what's really happening. So when brainstorming why the smartphone market was so different, I came up with a few different explanations, and just a disclaimer, this is mostly my opinion piece, but everything that I use to come to these conclusions will be in the description if you want to check that out. So the first and most obvious difference is the price, and while there's a wide range of prices for vehicles, most new cars are very expensive, and also while a premium phone that costs $1,000 to $1,500 is pretty expensive, it's much easier to save up for that than a $25,000 basic sedan. Earlier on in the video, I mentioned that I consider the iPhone to be the luxury car of phones, and in that way, you can kind of see that the iPhone is kind of a good deal when comparing it to other luxury cars. But that's the thing, if luxury cars were cheaper, then we would most likely see a lot more of them on the road, since they just include mostly everything in it. So people wouldn't have to really pay attention as much as to what they were getting inside of the car, as everything would be included for a decent price. So viewing it in that way, we can kind of see why there isn't as much of a separation in differences of phones, where we don't have specific camera-oriented phones and specific gaming-oriented phones. While we do see them, they're very rare at that point because the iPhone has a very good processor in it, as well as an amazing camera. That doesn't solve everything though, because there's still a lot of different makes of luxury cars on the road. So maybe if the price came down for luxury cars, we would see more of them, but we would still see some diversity in what people like, just due to the difference in styles of each car, right? But looking back at the phones, we see a lot of iPhones and then a couple of Samsung phones, which are most likely their most premium device. Still not as much diversity as even just looking at the luxury brands of cars. So the next thing I decided to look at was the ecosystem that surrounded these phones. And I'm sure you have already heard the term ecosystem before, but just as a refresher, it refers to the connectivity between multiple devices that each company makes, so that they work more seamlessly with each other, so that it's cooler, I guess. A great ecosystem is one where when you have a ton of different devices from that one company, your choice is really only limited to other devices that that company makes, as their seamless integration is so good for you that you wouldn't ever want to leave it. That in return gives the company much more money and security that they will continue to make money because you're basically locked in to only their products. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. Apple is notorious for their walled garden approach to their ecosystem, meaning that some of their devices don't even work with other devices that companies make and must use Apple devices. And if they are forced to make a device that works with others, they will also go out of their way to make that experience worse, just so that you can kind of complain that it's that bad, even in comparison to other competitors, just so that you would want to stay within their ecosystem. They are very intense with it. One of their biggest and most known uses of this was with iMessage and SMS. Cars can't leverage this as much, and I think the best way to explain this is by simply saying any car will get you from point A to point B. And when thinking of cars on more of a technological standpoint, you can kind of think of roads as the open source software that they run on. As long as you have a vehicle that complies with the road safety guidelines as well as the laws that surround the roads, then you're basically good to go. Now, if Apple were to make a car, which they actually canceled recently, fun fact, but in the same way that they make phones, then most likely they would have their own proprietary roads that only Apple cars can run on. And let's just say in this example that Apple has also made these roads super efficient and super great. Incredible gas mileage, incredible safety, incredible everything. And while their cars still work on normal roads, you're not gonna get as good of mileage even in comparison to other normal open source road car manufacturers. And in this scenario, all of these Apple roads lead to literally everything that you need, only missing a couple things that maybe the open source roads can get to. And you still might be thinking in this scenario, why would I buy an Apple car when I can get to everywhere in the open source cars? Because they also get to everywhere too, so why would I care? Well, here's the catch. Apple also includes destinations that are only on Apple-only roads, from grocery stores to bars to possibly even jobs. And a lot of your friends who all own Apple cars find bars and other fun places to hang out on these Apple-only roads. And if you don't have an Apple car, then every time that you guys want to hang out, they literally can't go to their favorite bar and instead have to settle for a decent bar somewhere else on an open source road. And that's just kind of embarrassing. I mean, just get an Apple car at that point. Like, why are you just going around with this open source vehicle? It's stupid. Like, you can get to everywhere with an Apple car because even the app, you can go everywhere. And a lot of people succumb to the pressure and buy an Apple car, and thus getting them everywhere, but also at the same time limiting the diversity of vehicles. This is literally how iMessage works for people. I legitimately know a couple people that have switched to an iPhone because they were being isolated by their friends who would make iMessage group chats and wouldn't include them because they were a green bubble. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't just a hate video on iPhone. It is, in fact, an incredible device, and it does a lot of things amazing, from its build quality all the way to its very easily approachable UI. It does absolutely deserve the popularity that it gets, but also they use some toxic traits to get there. And the reality of it is that there are a lot of other phone manufacturers that do offer the same amount of premiumness that an iPhone has, but so many people just completely dismiss it because it's not an iPhone. But hold on a sec, we looked at the Asian global markets. I made a whole title card and everything for it. So why is that not like how North America is? I believe the answer to that is the difference in early adoption rates, as well as economic and cultural differences. So in 2007, the original iPhone released to the North American and European markets, but not the Asian market. Although it was only a year later that the Asian markets got it, so that's not enough of a delay to fully explain why people weren't buying them. But it was obvious that people in America were the most interested in the iPhone, quickly becoming the fourth most popular phone by the end of 2007. Now, while this quick rise was not really reflected in other areas, Europe still eventually saw the same amount of growth of the iPhone in their markets, but Asia took its time, actually taking until basically around 2020 where it kind of started to get more popular. But it's not like the sales ever skyrocketed, it just kind of got mixed in with everything else. And technically it is the most popular phone in Asia, but again, by a very small margin. Now, this could be due to a lot of different variables, but the two most obvious ones to me is the difference in economics as well as cultural differences in Asia. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an economist, but the price sensitivity of the Asian phone market might have just been too different to fully accept the price of the iPhone within the 2000s and 2010s. And Samsung might have just been able to better advertise their phones within the Asian market. Speaking of Samsung, before 2016, Samsung was honestly looking like Apple for Asian phone sales for quite a while. Now, I do have to take that with a little grain of salt because I'm going off of StatCounter statistics, and they do have a lot of unknown phones within the Asian market. So it could be that Samsung dominated even more or dominated a little less. Now, if you didn't know, Samsung makes a lot of different phone lines, and this could have also helped them since they make phones from the cheap end all the way up to the iPhone premium end. And this could have kind of helped with their higher numbers, but it also could have just been the culture and brand recognition of Samsung within those countries. And by the way, culture and brand recognition also, of course, helped Apple, but there's something different going on here as well. Instead of how Apple continues to dominate the smartphone market, Samsung has really lost its lead and for the most part has just been mixed in with everybody else. Now, personally, I believe that this is because Samsung is using the same OS as every other smartphone manufacturer that they are competing with, as well as the fact that Samsung doesn't really keep a very strong walled garden either. A lot of Samsung devices do work better with Samsung phones, but at the same time, their earbuds and other things can also work with any other Android device. Because of this, the true race can just be who can make the best performing phone that feels the most premium, instead of who can make a good phone that can also culturally take over an entire continent and peer pressure everybody into also getting one without any consideration or thought of any other device. Now, as I mentioned briefly before, Apple has been growing in Asian markets, and it is in fact at this moment crowned with the most popular phone in Asia. However, However, I don't see things happening the same way that they are in America anytime soon, or maybe even ever. Since people have gotten so used to Android, the standard of communication is WhatsApp and other free and accessible apps that can be downloaded on both Android and iPhone. Meaning that people are probably not too interested in going to iMessage, where they can only experience good communication if their friend has an iPhone, and there's a good chance that they don't. Going back to my car analogy, in Asian markets, it's like Apple has created the same style of roads, just like here in America, but everybody in Asia kind of already has their favorite bar on an open source road that is accessible to everyone. So why would you buy an Apple car? You can, and you can still access everything, but there isn't as much of a pressure to do so. Okay, so I think I just about covered everything that I found, as well as my theories. So now it's time for the conclusion. So from everything that I showed you today, I think it's pretty obvious that things are going to continue to stay the same when it comes to variety in phones and cars. Cars are going to stay diverse because there's always going to be that giant price tag and a lot of different users that will want different things in cars, while phones basically are going to stay the same just because Apple has created this universe in which everybody just wants to use their software in phones. But at least we do know that diversity is possible, at least looking in other parts of the world. So maybe in the next couple years, we will see the same thing happen here in the US. Just kidding, that's not gonna happen. But maybe in the next 10 years, we see something happen. So if you take anything away from this video, just know that there are other options for phones out there other than just an iPhone. And you should just be open to that stuff, because Android has caught up in terms of its quality and its ease of use. And also, it's just fun to try new experiences. And the best part about Android is that people make skins and make different UIs within Android. So even though it's technically all the same OS, you still get very different experiences throughout all different Android phones. So I'm going to wrap this up because I am obviously boiling within my car as it's an 80-degree day and I have 0 windows open. So yeah, I hope you thought this video was thought-provoking, as really that's what I was aiming to do. And if you do want to see more of these videos, then get subscribed and hit like, as I'm going to be making other videos like this and other things surrounding technology. So definitely get subscribed for that, as I am a small channel and it would help out a lot. So yeah, that's all I have for today. More videos to come. Oh, and if you were wondering, I have a Samsung Galaxy S21 Plus. That's the phone that I use. Maybe you wanted to know that? I don't know.